Welcome back to the first video of the 2024 season. We are a week out from Christmas. Hope you've all been well in the off season. I played AFLW Fantasy for the first time. I got myself another hat. I think, was I sixth? I think I was sixth or ninth. I can't remember now. But added to the three. So 3 hats in 3 seasons, which is pretty good for a Supercoach player. But yeah, it's been good. It's been fun playing. I feel like I've learned some stuff for Supercoach as well. I feel like I'm in pretty good form for both at the moment, which is always good. So in this video, there was a few things I wanted to do. So I wanted to go over what to think about at this time of the year. We are still, like 3 months away from the AFL season, but the AFL Fantasy Picker has opened. The Supercoach one should hopefully be around the corner this week. So I just wanted to go through the thought process of filling out some of these early teams and what I'm doing. We're going to go through some of the players that I'm looking for and considering, and we're going to fill out this fantasy team as well, so you can have a look at that if you're interested. And maybe you're a Supercoach player that wants to have a go at fantasy as well, and this might be the place to start, given that that's what I did last year, and now I'm the fastest ever to have 3 AFL hats. I can't stop saying AFLW now. I've been playing it one season. I already can't stop throwing in the W everywhere. But before we go into that, I just wanted to, say a few words on the upcoming changes. And I feel like this 2024 season, is going to be a really big turning point in both the Supercoach and fantasy formats. And that's, of course, due to the addition of round 0, which I think is pretty poorly conceived, to be honest. I really dislike how it's been implemented pretty much altogether. And like AFL House are the only league organizers in the world that don't seem to understand that fantasy sport fans are the most diehard. We watch pretty much every game. We go to the games and we're willing to spend more on the sport than others. If you look at how it's exploded with American sports, whether it be NFL, NBA, whether you look at the EPL as well and what they've done with FPL, there's just so much appetite for this stuff, and winning these fans over and growing that fan base is huge for the sport. And creates new revenue streams. And it just seems to be that AFL House just doesn't understand that this is the case for Aussie rules, which is a real shame, because the changes that they've implemented ultimately affect the game, and most likely in a negative way. And that's what creates this turning point that I'm talking about for both fantasy and Supercoach, because how each of the formats choose to respond to that will then dictate, I think, the popularity of the games going forward and how engaged they are, because they are, a chance to create a really poor experience. My perspective on this is obviously warped as someone that creates content and does it competitively. I want to make sure that the games have a level of depth. And for those that don't know, I used to commentate on esports. So like video games is a big part of my background, and understanding the difference between casual and competitive play and how they interlink is something that's really interesting, because I think if you cater too heavily to a casual base, you don't have the depth of game that then makes an enduring force for both casuals and more professional play. And these are potentially some of the risks and the decisions being made at the moment, where because of the changes to AFL, we then try and simplify the games to cater to both fan bases, and you end up missing the target on both. Now, I don't claim to have a perfect answer for this. If you followed me on Twitter at Jackson Davey, you would have seen me discussing with a few different people about ideas and what I think could happen and what could work. But mine is just an opinion, no better or worse than anyone else's, to be honest, even though I'll argue passionately for it either way. So yeah, I think it's a really big turning point, and I actually hope that Supercoach does something different to AFL Fantasy, just because it would be good to see more alternatives and more options, and continue to be differences in the games that make each of them unique and fun to play. The way that AFL Fantasy has done it is to skip over round 0, so that what the 8 teams that play for that round, those scores don't matter outside of them potentially affecting price rises after round 1. But I think, that does really restrict who you pick, especially as you start to go into bye rounds. But yeah, and then for the bye rounds, for all of them, it's best 18, which I think is probably does make it more accessible, but I think less challenging in a way. I think the early bye rounds are just 2 trades for each of those, and then it gets to 3 later on. To be honest, at this point in the season, I'm not factoring it in too much to the decision making, which we'll go into a little bit, and we'll probably need to go over those fixtures closer to round 1. I think the other problem that with this is, because nothing happens after round 0. There's 8 teams where you get to look at the premiums, the mid prices, and the rookies, and then get to make decisions around whether you include them in your team based on what you've seen. We know that um, there's a huge gap between preseason and what you see there, and then round 1 and what you see there, with round 1 really being the true indicator of the roles, the potential, how good the team's going to be in a year. And to give away all that information for free at no cost, yes, it's a level playing field for everyone. We all get to see the same. But for me, it takes away a lot of the fun and challenge of picking a team and having a good round 1 team. That goes away, and I think you're going to end up with more similar teams based on the free information, but then also because of what the buys constrict you to. And I know that this is one of the biggest complaints. I think it's somewhat unfair. You're always going to end up with similar teams at some point in the year in these types of formats. But I do think that these changes accelerate that, and that's what I'm not a huge fan of. On the flip side, I can see these changes and having more similar teams at the start, having best 18 rounds. It will have everyone closer to the pack. So I think you won't see breakaways as much as you have in previous years. But even in fantasy, I felt like, post the first 10 rounds, you can still make up a lot of ground. If you're outside the top 1,000, you can still finish with a hat. So I didn't necessarily feel like that was a massive restrictor. As I said, I didn't think it was something that needed to be fixed in that way, but it is what it is. So we'll go through that. But yeah, that's just, I guess, something to keep an eye on this year. I think it's going to be one of the biggest stories in Supercoach and Fantasy in terms of how they've reacted to the changes that AFL have made. And to be honest, I think one thing that I've seen as well is like a lot of anger towards Warney or whoever's, Al and Tim and stuff on the Supercoach side. But the reality is, like, they didn't ask for these changes. They didn't want this to happen. They're just trying to manage all their stakeholders to get the best outcome they can. That's a bit of a cop-out, but there was a lot of toxicity that's just not required to them. Like, they're also trying to deal with this, and it's their job, which can't be a lot of fun. They just want to enjoy these games as much as we do. All right. So, what are we thinking about at this time of the year when we start to look at these sides? What am I researching? And we'll go into some of that research a little bit. But in general, I'm not looking at premiums. There's not a ton to glean from researching premiums in depth. There's not much to learn. What I tend to be looking at is players that are coming off discounts, or like have some type of discounts. They're coming off an injury. They didn't play last year. They only played a few games, these types of things. We're looking at players that change sides. We're looking at correlations for players when certain players were in and out of the sides, or when certain roles weren't played. So an example of this would be looking at, for team moves, you could look at like Grundy and how was he when he was a first ruck. But on the flip side, you could look at Gawn and see how he was when Grundy wasn't in the side. And you can start to then figure out who's winning or losing based on these things, where there's the value in these players. That's the type of stuff I'm researching at this point in the year. There really isn't too much point looking into rookies, of course, as well. So yeah, definitely start to get into some of the training reports for the teams, which starts to give information around premiums and rookies. But even then, it's less about that. It's more around positions, roles, people playing, and whether you've got some of those mid prices or cheaper options, at full fitness, playing the right roles. Premiums can start to rule themselves out at this time of year based on those reports as well, and how those players are traveling. So a good example would be Bontempelli, who I think he had ankle surgery and is not back at full training. He might be back in from early January, and that would be okay. But something like that starts to rule these players out for me if they're still carrying injuries through the preseason and the top price. It's just very unlikely they'll back up their performance based on that. I think English is actually another one that's still not back in full training. And then, for the rookies, like, you just want to see good reports for them. And there's some positional stuff like McKercher. I probably shouldn't say a lot of their names because I haven't heard a lot of them be pronounced. But it sounds like he's going to play the Sheezel role at halfback potentially next year, which is interesting because I don't know how Fisher, Sheezel, and McKercher all play that role. But if he does get that role, then that's a really positive sign. He was already a big accumulator, so. Those are the types of things I'm looking at, but it's not really premium research. I see a lot of people talking about premiums already. I just don't think there's much value in doing that. You're wasting your time. Spend it looking at those guys that are discounted, have moved clubs. Keep an eye on injuries and positional changes, and that's about it. Everything else you kind of figure out towards the end. All right, so let's get into picking this team then. And while I do that, I might talk through some of the players that I'm looking or considering as we go through this. So I did pick a team, I think a few days ago and cleared it, and I don't have it in front of me what I picked. So we're back to square one. There's two ways you can kind of do this, I find. So the first, and maybe this is the biggest thing I've learned about fantasy, is um, primos. Like primos is kind of a redundant concept in this. It used to be guns and rookies used to be the thing and everything, and it's definitely still that a bit in Supercoach. But fantasy is not about that at all. Fantasy is a game of value, and when I'm picking a team, I want every single player to have gone up in price after round one. That is effectively what I'm trying to do. And that's why like picking a lot of these top price guys ends up not working very well because a lot of them don't go up. They are lucky to go sideways. They often go backwards. But this is a game all about value early on. And you just want to maximize that value best you can. So I'm looking for players that have upside, and that means I'm often scrolling through a lot of these premiums to start with. They're not the ones that are going to provide a lot of that value. So we could do this two ways. We can either go line by line, or we can just scroll down the list overall and start to look for them. Or what I might do is I've got some players like top of mind that I thought were good value and I could look at, and I might go after those. So in defense, I know Dacos will be a very popular pick coming off that ankle injury. I think he's got the tag somewhat early against Finn. Where is it? Round 4, and then he's got the bye. So I don't know, maybe we're picking at round 6 or 7. I probably won't start him. There's a good chance that he actually goes really well and goes to the next level. He's one that I'd be nervous about not starting. But yeah, the rest of these kind of don't interest me. The first ones we get to are kind of like Whitfield finished the year good, but I don't know if he can be trusted anymore. Short, there's talk that I think he's moving back to halfback where he scored better in the past, so he's an interesting one. Wanganin Malira is another one that's interesting just because he improved towards the back half of last year, especially once Sinclair, I think, had moved back. Let me just see if I'd written notes on him. I hadn't, but that's okay. I will just show you my spreadsheet quickly. We'll go into this one. Oh, okay. I've got Wanganin Malira up anyway. So put in Sinclair. For those that haven't seen this before, this is just like a spreadsheet I've got that looks at player stats. So you've got Supercoach, Fantasy, the number of CBAs they had, their time on ground, their played on kick-ins percent, ruck contests, whether the game was a win or a loss for their side, who they played, and then you can chuck in another player from the team and see if they were playing the same games and what that looks like. Now, because Sinclair's was a role change, this spreadsheet isn't as good at that, but I can always just chuck him in here to have a look at what those games were, where was Sinclair playing more CBAs, all that type of stuff. But the point here is that through the first, 6 games, Wanganin Malira started off pretty poorly. And then you can see over the back half of the year, that average improved a fair bit with him, averaging 98 over the back half of the year, but priced at 91. And given that he's young and might still have some upside as well, that is someone that we could definitely look at in our sides. So Wanganin Malira is probably the first highly priced primo that I'd consider in defense. I mean, I don't mind if people want to go Dacos, but yeah. And then Hayden Young is the one that was probably going to be my first picked defender. And once again, he's someone that if you just look at some of his stats, especially to finish the year, so he had 4 games where he had 75% CBAs or more rather than playing a defender. And in that period, he averaged 102 fantasy. He's priced at, I believe, 89. So 13-point upside. Definitely someone that could go from this to like top 6 defender at the end of the year. So I like Hayden Young as a pick, probably my first pick defender. Moving down the list more, like this starts to get into a little bit of a risky range at 700k, and I actually can't remember if there's too many I like before. Himmelberg, around this price point, there's a few that are interesting. So Himmelberg's another one where he got moved around a lot last year. When he was in defense, he had like 10 games before the bye, and I think he averaged something like 56 fantasy. And then in the 12 games post bye, he had 86 fantasy in that defender role. He's priced at 72, so there's like an easy 14 points upside. I think the tricky thing with Himmelberg is that GWS have the bye round 3. So while he's value, I'm not sure I actually want to start someone that would be missing in the first 3 games. Other ones at this price point, like Blakey's one that I'll have to have a look at some point and consider. But I think Coleman's another one. So he benefited off the back of Rich going out. So I think he had 9 games at the end without Rich. He went at around 84, which isn't enough to be a top 6, but does offer a fair bit of value at his price. So he's one that could be considered. And he looked like he would actually be better than that before last year. So I'm kind of curious to see how he looks in the preseason this year. Scrolling, just looking for names that we like the look of. Windhager is another one. So he was moved all around last year. And so in the first 6 games, I think he did like a lot of tagging, had very low time on ground. He might have even been sub once or twice. He averaged 34 fantasy. And in the last 12, I think he averaged something like 81 or something like that. So he's priced at 63. If he has that, like that role where he's junking up and half back a lot, I think he could be pretty good value as well. So those are some of the value picks I think I like around this point. And as I said, it's just around finding value. One I haven't looked into, but I will, is Chapman. So I think he's one that could be considered. Depends on what role he gets. And then I believe there's someone around 400k. Like, oh, Zach Williams. Everyone should have Zach Williams. It's just a no-brainer. He's priced so cheap. And then the last one is Caulfield, who I've been a fan of. Well, like he's got the potential, but obviously hasn't been able to get his body right. He's very cheaply priced, and if he's able to secure a role in the Dogs' backline, then at 358k, he's a bit of a steal. In terms of like bench options here, it's too early to say, but some of the names you may have heard is Zach Reed, who was Essendon key defender pick from, I want to say the 2020 season or 2021. He's struggled with injuries the last 2 years, but looks to be in a position where his body's right, and hopefully we'll get some game time this year. But I think you can probably pass on him for someone like a Gibkiss, where he's still in the rehab group, but if he comes back early next year, I think you could consider him. And I'm just throwing in Toby Pink now as well, just because it seems like he'll get games at North, but rookies are really a crapshoot at this point. I wouldn't put too much emphasis into them. Next, I'm going to go to the rucks, because this is probably the most interesting section to talk about. There's probably only 4 that I'm seriously considering here. And those would be English, just because not only will he most likely be the R1 again, he's a captain option week in, week out. And I think that is the one position, the one reason you can splash out in players, you want to have good captain options. So if you see Dacos as the top scorer or English as the top scorer this year, then you could potentially pay for them. It's also to do with positional scarcity with English as well. Like his average over next best should be good enough to warrant the extra price. But I'm not going that way. Once again, we're finding value. So I think the first value up option would be Gone with no Grundy in the side. He had 6 games, and I believe he averaged 113 fantasy during that period. He's priced at something like 97. So that would provide the upside. And if he was able to get back to that point, it would put him probably in the top 2 rucks for the year as well. So you'd be able to pick up a really good keeper for 830k. The knocks on Gone, obviously, to do with his age and injury history at this point as well, and where he's at with both of those. So that does worry me a little bit. I mentioned him already, but Grundy is going to be one of the rucks that I take this year. I think he probably has the right risk profile. We want to see him in the preseason, but he had 4 games without Gone last year and averaged 100 fantasy in those. He's priced at 75. That's a 25-point upside, which I really like. And then the other one, who should have been a season winner for me last year, was Tristan Cherry, who I had, and he went down in the first quarter of round 1 or something like that last year. So I think he only ended up having about 2 games without Goldie where he wasn't injured, and he went like a 90-something average for fantasy. He's priced at 66, I believe. That might be wrong, but he should be dirt cheap. Well, he is dirt cheap, 580k. So these are the 2 value rucks I like. If I had to be pushed for a 5th ruck that wasn't these, I mean, I could see people being interested in Marshall, but Soldo might be the other one if he cleans up that number 1 ruck spot. And then bench options here. Look, I could see people going cheap. I actually think, as always, it's valuable having a playing ruck in R3, especially given that I think it's Grundy that has an early buy round. So I'll be looking to pick up someone that is playing as a ruck. They also tend to generate a lot of cash. So maybe someone like a Reed for West Coast will get games, and he's 213k, so it's not a huge investment. Something like that makes sense for me for now. But if I have to, if Sweet ends up getting games at 387k, I might even consider putting as much as that into a ruck just to get the cover and the cash gen. Forwards up next, and then we'll go to midfielders last. So originally it was going to be Baslenka, but with his ACL being gone, it looks like Finn McRae is one that we could consider. McRae's stats, where are they? Have I done them? I don't think I have. All right, we'll jump over into the other sheet and have a look. So if we jump into Jack McRae, we pull up Bailey Smith. So the nice thing about this sheet is that it has this little teammate thing here with and without. So he had 3 games without Bailey Smith, and he went a little bit less in fantasy, but a little bit more in Supercoach. It's pretty interesting because you can see in these games without him, it didn't really actually lead to a massive uptick in CBAs, which is very interesting. I can have a look at 2022, see if that makes a difference. Not that it's really a worthwhile comparison because they played quite different roles year on year. So yeah, I mean, Supercoach did better, but fantasy not so much. So I'm not sold on Jack McRae yet. There might end up being better options than him, and I definitely wouldn't be opposed to getting away from the most expensive guy in the line. They almost never work out, but he's in there for now. And then Flanders is one who finished off in amazing form last year. I think he's 10 games to finish off the year. He averaged 105 fantasy. I can't see them mucking with that role given how good he was. He's priced, I think, around 90. So that's probably my first picked forward at the moment. Beyond that, I think the next one you could probably look at is someone like a Taylor Adams. It'll be interesting to see what role he gets. He's obviously had history where he's done much better than the 77 when he's on the ball. But where he's at and with the other options the Swans have, I'm not sure if he's actually getting that much more mid-time than what he did at the Pies. We'll see. But yeah, I'm probably passing on him for now. Other forwards that we like in here, I mean, Bailey, if he ever became a full on baller, don't think that'll happen. Rochelle, Crows fans will have to correct me. Was he carrying something to finish off the back end of last year? They originally started with him and Rankin as rotational options in the midfield, but went away from both of them in the back half of the year. With Crouch coming back into the side, I can't see him getting more midfield time. So at the moment, I'm off Rochelle. Baker is an interesting one. I'll just include him for now. I might change that option. I have a feeling that Uze will settle him into a good role. He's one of their best users and playmakers, to be honest. I think he has been used as a Mr. Fix-It, and if he gets away from that and gets settled into a role, I think that's quite interesting. But it's a little bit hard to know what that role would be. We'd have to see it in the preseason. I feel like there were more options. Why am I not seeing them? Okay. Where are the options? It's not 5. And I think I'm looking. So hold on, there's a few here. One that I've seen in a few teams is Sardis. I'm going to put in James Jordan. If he gets midfield times at the Swans, I actually prefer him to Adams. And then we've got Reed, obviously, as a rookie on-field option, which I think is where most people will be playing him. And then, yeah, Sardis is another one that I've seen. I'm not sure I love him as a pick. I feel like there was another 600k. This was the other 600k option. Zach Fisher. So one that North's talked about as playing on half-back this year. We saw Hall, Zeeble just absolutely crush it with these roles. So yeah, I think it's, I guess, a little bit tricky to know if it's all of Fisher, McKercher, and Sheasel or what that's going to look like. We'll have to monitor for the preseason, but yeah, that's a decent option there. In terms of rookies, I'll jump to those and actually just put in a couple. So, I mean, I don't mind having like a more expensive one in as a placeholder. I don't like having to just have 200k rooks because often they're not the best ones. Does anyone actually like it the more than 200 price mark? I mean, Caddy should get games for Essendon. I just don't think he's going to be a good pick. Dersmo should get games, I think, but probably not a good pick. Could look at someone like Finn McRae if he gets games, but I think there's a chance Bytel gets signed and goes past him. I don't mind if like Fantasia can get his body right. Maybe there's a role for him in that side. That's a big if though, if he can get his body right. And I like he's in rehab or something to start the year as well. I like he's not 100% at the moment. So I'm just going to put in Sean Manor at 200k. There's like about 4 or 5 Geelong rooks that people are talking up at the moment. I don't know which ones are good or not, so we'll just have to see. I also find Geelong training reports are hard to come by. All right, so pretty much not going to go any of these top 5 or 6. Various reasons why not. The first one that interests me is Tom Green. Now, the really hard part with Tom Green is this fixture is so strange. So round 1 North, round 2 West Coast, and then round 3 he's got the bye. In round 0, I think he has Collingwood. So this is a tricky one. These are 2 amazing matchups, or have been in the past, but then bye early is not good. He started off last year very strong as well. So I'm weighing up whether Tom Green makes sense or not. The midfielder I actually want probably to start the most is Sam Walsh, 854k. I think he's a bit of a steal. Problem is he's got the round 2 bye after playing Richmond in round 1. So what I'm thinking is I might start Green and then trade to Walsh when Green's on bye. Not sure about that. I would like to start Walsh at his price point. I think that's great value. Brayshaw is an interesting one because he started slowly last year and then built into the year. Parrish was a bit up and down as well. I could see him being better. Who else do I like as midfielders? Butters is one. I, once again, can't remember if I actually wrote up anything on Butters. So his last 5, he was like 110 fantasy. He was another one that started off slowly and got better as the year went on. And I think when he had, he had, I think a few games earlier had really low CBAs and kind of was averaging under 100 and then just got better as he went on. So I like Butters. LDU is another one where when he was fit, he was one of the best scoring mids in the game. And then otherwise he wasn't. Actually, Chair is one I'm going to put on my list to look at. I'm probably avoiding Steele and Miller. We saw Miller's role changed a lot towards the end of last year. I'd only consider putting him back in if it was going back to what he'd previously had and he was fit, which I think are 2 pretty big ifs. Steele, I'm not sure if his body's ever going to get right, so he's currently out of the side, but is one that I can understand why people are interested in. And then, yeah, Walsh at 854k would be amazing if he didn't have that early buy. Just don't see him as very viable, to be perfectly honest. I think Hugh McCluggage is another one that's interesting without Ashcroft, but I think he's also around 2 buy, so that's not great. And then, yeah, I mean, Mills would have been a good option. We are getting low pretty quickly. All right, Matt Crouch is another one that I think is pretty interesting. He's got a price discount built in, but we saw at the back end of last year, in the last 6, I think he had something like a 98 average. And he should have he's got a pretty big discount built into that. So I don't mind that as an option. He should be playing as an inside mid. It's really the only thing he can do. So don't hate that at all. Next down on the list, is I could see something like Jai Simpkin being interesting here. He's had injuries over the last couple of years. The one thing I worry about was with the emergence of LDU, with Wardlaw ready to take another step forward, and even players like Phillips starting to come on. What does Jai Simpkin's role look like going forward? Does he start to move around a bit? That's probably one concern there. But if he's going to be full on board mid and he's fully fit, then I could see him being value. A lot of North guys. George Hewitt is another one that I'm interested in. His best has been much better than this. But yeah, pretty injury affected year last year. And I think he had some subs or really low TOG games in there as well. So this price is pretty crazy for him. That's what, 74? So they got their, is that their price start? Probably. So if he's priced at 74, that's, I think, pretty good value for what he can do. I would expect up in the 90s. The other one which I'm interested in is, where's he at? Must be down here. I mean, Wardlaw is here, but Sheldrick, who was really, really good last year. So he had, I think, 7 games, 3 where he was injured or sub, but in the 4 games where he was mid, He had 91 fantasy on 41% CBAs. He's priced at, I think, 62. So, yeah, this is really good value if he gets a midfield role and he's fit and firing. All right, Sardis, I kind of already mentioned that I'm not going to play. Let's fill out some more rookies and see what cash we've got to play with at the end. We're almost done making a team. So McKercher, as I mentioned, should be playing a halfback role. Sanders, mid for the doggies. Role has definitely opened up with Bailey Smith being out of the side. So I'm, pretty confident with him being an on-field rookie. And just with the way that we've done it and getting the value in, only 3 on-field rookies here in McKercher, Sanders, and Reed, which I think is pretty good because if you think about how those buy rounds run from round 2, best 18, it actually means that in all likelihood, I can probably field no rookie scores, or only the rookie scores if they pop, 100s. I think we might have gotten a little bit too used to like the Dacosters, Sheasels, Nick Martins of the world over the last few years. It's definitely not the standard, but it's a really good spot to be in. I think only having a few and potentially having them drop off or an injury score drop off as part of that best 18. All right, I'm going to put in my namesake, Jay Davey, in the utility slot as a placeholder now and for good luck. And then honestly, if you've, how do we sort by here? If you've had enough at this point, you can just go team selected by and use it to help fill out your last couple of spots. So Dan Curtin's really popular. I thought he was a key position defender, so I don't know why he's as popular as what he is. I guess maybe over like Gibkiss or Pink in defense. Watson is a small forward for the Hawks. Probably not great for this format. I've got no idea who Wilson is. Sharp is one that has been talked up as a wing for Freo, potentially locking down that spot. So I don't necessarily mind having him in there. Someone like Jai Clark would be good if he comes on this year for the Cats, but there's a lot of Cats rookies that are being talked about. Okay, I mean, they're all placeholders anyway. I'm not going to lose too much sleep over it. And yeah, as I mentioned, one of the things I like doing is actually having a bit of cash on the bench. So you could extra 56K here, extra 100K here, 10K, extra 100K here, just so you can play around with that and make sure you don't have to pull apart your team when it actually comes to those final rounds and people are getting named. All right, now extra 200K, so I could probably upgrade someone here, like if it's getting rid of like, Himmelberg, could he get up to, I could put him to, who was I talking about before? Wangni Malira. Yeah, there you go, that's an option. I actually still have Hewitt in there. I don't know if I actually want Hewitt there. This is where, like, if I could use the money to get Walsh or something instead. Anyway, I'm not going to fuss about it too much. So yeah, this is a first draft team. Once again, it's just about chucking in plays that I think are good value, having an understanding of these other ones that I think are nice value that I need to go away and have a look at. So players like Chapman, who I mentioned, Sardis, I need to have a bit of a think about those types that potentially will come in and fill out some of these other spots. The team itself, I think, looks pretty ugly because there really is no top end. I think a lot of people will be quite scared of running this at the moment, but I found this is the formula that works best for fantasy so far. All right, so I think that brings us to the end of the video. If you've enjoyed it, let me know. If you've got any picks that you think I should look at or you've got locked in first up, let me know. Otherwise, the next time I'll see you is probably when the Supercoach Picket is out. I'm not sure if I'm going to do it live this year or just do a bit of a recording. We'll see what else is going on and speak to you then. Peace.